The hum of the flickering fluorescent lights at Mel's diner echoed like a tired sigh. Above David Martinez as he scrubbed the already clean counter for the third time that night. It was to 17 a.m. the hour when even silence seems exhausted and the only soul sharing the space with him was a woman sitting alone in a corner booth. Her posture immaculate, her tailored suit flawless, her hands trembling lightly against a porcelain mug of untouched coffee. She radiated power, the kind of poise that spoke of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, of homes with more bathrooms than people. But beneath that polished exterior was a tremor barely perceptible, but deeply familiar to David. It was the kind of tremor that came from carrying a burden too heavy, too long. Without warning, her breath hitched, her hand clutched her chest, as she crumpled against the cracked vinyl seat before sliding to the floor like a marionette. With cut strings, David didn't think he moved. He vaulted the counter with the urgency of a man who'd stared down life or death before, dropping to his knees beside her and pressing his factory-worn hands into her chest. Hands that had never held wealth, but had held his son when he cried through nights of pain. Hands that, now, beat against this stranger's ribcage like a desperate drum of defiance. When she came to somewhere in the humming cocoon of the ambulance, her eyes fluttered open and met his. Her voice, raspy and thin, cut through the chaos like a thread of fate. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have a son too," and with that, their lives to separate orbits spiraling in opposite skies tilted ever so slightly toward each other. The old wall clock at Mel's had been 3 minutes slow for 2 years, but David had never fixed it. There was no point. Time, during the graveyard shift, was served slow thick with silence, grief, and the weight of too many memories. For 8 months, David had lived in the overlap between exhaustion and necessity. The factory job kept the roof over their heads. The diner job kept the electricity on and Jake's medication from running out. Barely. Most nights passed like ghosts, quiet, weightless, forgettable. But not this one. The air had felt different from the moment David unlocked the front door. The AC wheezed like a dying man. The coffee machine whined with mechanical despair. And then she'd entered. She walked in like she owned gravity. A navy suit that cost more than David earned in a season. Stilettos that clicked with purpose. A briefcase that gleamed like ambition personified. But her eyes were haunted. David knew that look. It stared back at him every time he glanced in the mirror. While calculating how long Jake could survive without a drug insurance, had decided it was no longer profitable to produce. The woman ordered black coffee, but never drank it. Her phone buzzed constantly on the Fox marble table. She never picked it up, but each vibration deepened the crease in her brow, tightened the muscles along her jaw. David refilled sugar dispensers, wiped counters already clean, restructured the pie display with mechanical precision, but his gaze kept drifting back to her. Something was unraveling in her. He could see it. His own phone was silent, but he knew what awaited him. Missed calls from Jake's cardiologist, voicemails about prescriptions he could no longer afford, a concerned text from Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, who had stepped into the role of babysitter, grandmother, and guardian angel. Jake's medication Life cost $1,400 a month. It kept his fragile heart ticking like an overworked clock. Without it, Jake had maybe 6 months. With it, he could grow up, fall in love, have a future. The thought of that gap between life and loss was a canyon David couldn't cross. No matter how many hours he worked, the woman stirred. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she glanced at it, and the mask she wore cracked. Her face paled. Her hand shook as she reached for the mug. "Long night?" David asked softly, his voice breaking the fragile stillness. She looked startled, as if she'd forgotten where she was. "Something like that," she replied, her tone tight. "Got any aspirin?" David shook his head. "Fresh out. There's a 24-hour CVS a couple miles down Highway 9. You all right?" She waved him off. "Just tired. Board meetings." She gave a hollow smile. "You know how it is." Or she paused, glancing at his apron. "Maybe you don't. On any other night, that would have stung. But tonight," David was more concerned with the sheen of sweat on her brow and the way her breathing was beginning to hitch. Then, without warning, she doubled over. The mug slipped from her fingers and shattered. A stark exclamation mark of ceramic and spilled coffee. She gasped, "Call 911. Before collapsing entirely, David didn't waste a second. Training kicked in. His hands moved before his brain did. The phone was in his hand. His knees hit the floor. He began CPR, counting compressions, feeling the tremble in her ribs as he fought to bring her back. The dispatcher's voice was calm and distant in his ear, but all David could focus on was the fragility of the life beneath his palms. She wasn't just some CEO. She was someone's mother. The ambulance came. Paramedics took over, swift and efficient. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, patted David's shoulder. "You did good. Might have saved her life." The diner fell back into silence as the red and blue lights vanished down the road. David stood there, staring at the broken mug, the dark coffee bloom on the floor like spilled ink from a chapter unfinished. His hands were trembling. He cleaned without thinking, wiping, sweeping, mopping. But her words haunted him. "I have a son too." The rest of the shift passed in a haze of fluorescent light and emotional residue. By dawn, David convinced himself the moment had been just that, a moment. Intense, but fleeting. Life would return to its old rhythm. Jake's condition wouldn't change. The numbers still wouldn't add up. He was wrong. The next night, just as the sky gave way to twilight and the neon open sign buzzed to life, she returned. David was restocking pies when the bell above the door chimed. He looked up, expecting Frank the trucker or Sarah the exhausted nurse. But it was her. She was back, still elegant, still commanding, but softer somehow. The edges had shifted like glass smoothed by ocean waves. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm, and the kind of expression that suggested the ground beneath. Her feet had been shaken, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stand somewhere new. She walked into the diner like a woman who had glimpsed the edge of her mortality and wasn't quite sure what to do with the knowledge. Her posture still held the elegance of someone used to commanding boardrooms, but her eyes were different. There was a quiet searching in them now, less guarded, more human. She saw David immediately and offered a soft, genuine smile that didn't belong to the version of her that had collapsed on a cracked vinyl booth the night before. "I was hoping you'd be here," she said, sliding wordlessly into the same seat where life had nearly left her body. "I wanted to thank you." Properly, David wiped his hands on his grease-stained apron and approached her slowly. "Just did what anyone would have done," he said quietly. "How are you feeling now?" "Beta, Meta, Catherine," she replied with a small, amused smile, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Please, sit." He obeyed, reluctantly. "The doctor said if you hadn't acted as fast as you did." She paused, her voice dipping into a hushed reverence. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," David said firmly, but he stayed seated anyway. "I'm just glad you're all right." She looked at him, then really looked, and David felt like she was peeling back his layers without needing to ask a single question. He shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of being truly seen. "You mentioned in the ambulance, you have a son." David nodded. "Jake. He's 10. A softness crept into her face. "That's a good age. Still young enough to believe his dad can fix anything. Old enough to start realizing the world is messier than it looks." He could tell those weren't empty words. She wasn't guessing. She'd lived it. "You have kids, a daughter, 25, lives in Seattle now. We don't talk much." David didn't have to ask why. The guilt in her voice was already an open wound. "My fault mostly," she admitted. "I spent years building a life, a career, made sure she had everything I didn't, except me." A pause settled between them, quiet, but not uncomfortable. The parents sitting in the wreckage of different choices, both shaped by love, both shadowed by regret. "I'm Catherine Walsh," she said after a while. "I should have introduced myself properly before." Her name hit David like a slap. The puzzle pieces clicked instantly into place, and the world tilted under his feet. Catherine Walsh, CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the same company that had just condemned his son to a slow, preventable death. He barely heard himself respond. "David Martinez." "David," she repeated, tasting his name like something sacred. "You saved my life. That's not something I take lightly." He shook his head, the weight of irony crashing down like thunder. "Anyone would have—" "No," she interrupted. "Not anyone. You didn't stop to ask who I was. You just moved. You acted. That says something about you." David looked away, uncomfortable with praise that felt like sandpaper against old scars. "Just basic human decency in my world," she said softly. "That's rare." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a business card. "I'd like to do something for you, a gesture, something real, a reward, or just a way to say thank you." David took the card. His eyes scanned the text dot, and the floor vanished from beneath him. Catherine Walsh, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the same company that had written to him last month to say that Cardolife, the life-sustaining drug keeping his son's heart beating, was being discontinued. His hands trembled. The universe's cruelty felt too precise to be accidental. I can't accept anything, he said, voice hollow. Why not? She asked, her brow furrowing. You want to thank me, he said, his voice low, trembling. Then don't kill my son. The air shifted. Her expression froze. Your company makes Cardolife, he continued, standing now, the booth groaning beneath the sudden tension. My son Jake, he's taken it every day for 3 years. It's the only thing keeping his heart in rhythm. She was pale now, like the blood had fled her veins. What's your son's name? Jake Martinez, 10 years old. And last month your company told me he has until the end of the year, because it's not profitable enough. Her lips parted in shock. David's anger boiled beneath his skin. I've been working 2 jobs trying to afford alternatives that don't exist. You want to repay me? He pulled a crumpled letter from his wallet and tossed it on the table like a gauntlet. Start there. He turned to walk away, but her voice, cracking like glass, stopped him. Wait. He turned. She held the letter. With shaking hands, reading every word like it was written in blood. I didn't know, she whispered. I sign off on dozens of recommendations a month, but this children like Jake I didn't know. There are 47 of us, David said, bitterly. I started a petition. That's how many families signed it before it disappeared into the digital abyss. She looked up, stricken, and in that moment, David saw something in her face collapse. Ego, certainty, illusion. 47 children, 47 families. We don't make decisions based on margins. We make them based on whether our kids live to see another birthday. The silence between them stretched wide and trembling. She folded the letter gently and placed it back into her purse, her hands no steadier than before. I could fix this, she whispered, almost to herself. I can fix this, can you? He asked. Will you go into that boardroom and convince 12 people that saving 4 to 7 lives is worth losing a few $1 million? She rose slowly, still returning to her spine. I don't know what kind of person you think I am, David, but I know what kind of person I want to be. The kind who deserved to have her life saved by someone like you. She moved toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. Her voice was steady now, controlled, determined. There's a board meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. I don't know how I'll explain it, but I will. And if they say no, she turned and looked him squarely in the eyes, then I'll remind them who signs their paychecks. The bell over the door jingled as she disappeared into the night. David was left with nothing but the buzz of fluorescent lights and a fragile ember of hope. He dared not feed. He learned the hard way not to trust in convenient miracles. Promises from powerful people had expiration dates. They sounded beautiful, but often disappeared when it was time to pay the cost. And yet, as he stared through the window, watching the red tail lights fade into the dark, he found himself clinging to the way her hands had trembled as she read that letter. Maybe some miracles weren't lies. He finished his shift on autopilot, body present, but spirit tangled in a storm of possibility. For so long, hope had been a luxury he couldn't afford. Jake didn't need dreams, he needed pills. David had forgotten what it felt like to believe in something more than survival. Catherine Walsh had walked back into his life with power, with promise, with the capacity to make real change. But power wasn't the same as intention, and good intentions weren't promises. By the time he stepped through the front door of his aging apartment complex, the sun was beginning to rise. The neighborhood was crumbling around the edges, peeling paint, cracked sidewalks, windows that groaned in the wind, but it was the only place he could stretch the salaries far enough to make room for medicine. Mrs. Chen was already on her balcony. With tea and an old newspaper, she waved. She'd helped raise Jake since the day Maria, David's wife, was taken by a car accident on a rainy night 3 years ago. She never asked for money, just groceries or a little help setting up the remote. She knew what loneliness felt like, what grief tasted like. David unlocked the apartment door quietly. The living room doubled as his bedroom. The kitchen was the size of a closet. Jake's room was sacred, tiny, but full of life. Medical machines hummed like a symphony of defiance. Nebulizer, pulse oximeter, pill organizer. And in the center of that organizer sat Cardolife. Those tiny white pills, more precious than diamonds, more fragile than dreams. Jake slept soundly, his breath slow, even, safe. David stared for a long moment, then turned to make coffee. Same ritual. Coffee, shower, wake Jake, cereal or toast, sometimes eggs. Talked about fourth-grade adventures like they were just another family, like their world wasn't stitched together with threadbare faith. Then his phone rang. A known number, local code. He hesitated. This is David. Mr. Martinez. This is Rebecca Chen from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I'm calling on behalf of Catherine Walsh. She'd like to schedule a meeting with you this afternoon if you're available. His grip on the phone tightened. A meeting? Yes, sir. She has some information regarding your son's medication that she'd like to discuss in person. David's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. What time would the PM work? For you. He swallowed hard. Catherine had her board meeting at 10. She wanted to meet at 2. That meant something had already happened. The only question was, what? Where? The Meridian office is downtown. I can send a car if you need. No, David interrupted, voice steady. I'll be there. He paused, then asked the question that had been burning since sunrise. Miss Chen, did the board meeting go? Well, the line went silent, so silent that David could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator behind him and the soft tick of the kitchen clock, both indifferent to the weight pressing against his chest. Then the voice on the phone returned, cautious, but calm. Mr. Martinez, I think it's best if Miss Walsh explains the situation herself. What I can tell you is that she's been in meetings since early this morning, and she specifically asked that I call you as soon as possible. The line disconnected, leaving David staring at the receiver, still cradled in his hand. The familiar ache of cautious hope twisted in his chest. He'd been here before, expecting a miracle, only to be handed another polite refusal. Catherine Walsh, for all her poise and decency, was still a CEO, and CEOs had boards. Boards had shareholders. Shareholders cared about margins, not miracles. No matter how much she might want to help, there were limits, always limits. He let the phone drop onto the counter and exhaled slowly, as if trying to release the anticipation curling in his gut. He had to protect himself. Hope, in a higher dose, could be lethal. At 7:30, just as predictably as the sun rising over the rust-colored rooftops of their neighborhood, Jake shuffled into the kitchen, dragging the hem of his dinosaur pajamas too. Small now, but stubbornly worn like a badge of comfort. There was something disarmingly adult about the way he moved through the morning, precise, measured, quiet, a child of routine, shaped by the fragile rhythm his illness demanded. Morning, Dad. Jake mumbled sleepily as he climbed into his usual chair at the kitchen table. Morning, buddy, David said with a weary smile, placing a bowl of cereal in front of him. How was work? David paused for a beat, letting the moment settle before answering. Interesting night, he said. I helped someone who was having a medical emergency. Jake's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. Like when you helped Mrs. Patterson when she fell down the stairs. Something like that. Jake nodded solemnly, digesting the gravity of it the way only a kid who spent too much time in hospitals could. Then he chewed a spoonful of cereal and asked, You're worried about something, aren't you? David blinked, momentarily stunned though he shouldn't have been. Jake had always been able to read emotions with uncanny precision. When you live on the edge of danger, you learn quickly to assess the emotional temperature of the adults around you. Survival depended on it. I'm meeting someone today, David said carefully. Someone who might be able to help with your medicine. Jake's eyes widened slightly. The expensive one. Yeah, that one. Is it someone important? David chuckled softly, not out of amusement, but wonder. Very important. She's in charge of the company that makes your medication. Jake considered that. Then, she can fix it, right? David looked away, unable to answer. Maybe. We'll see. They finished breakfast in silence, the kind of silence that wrapped around them like a blanket, rather than a wall. Jake went off to school, his backpack too big for his narrow shoulders, and David showered, shaved, and put on his best shirt, the one reserved for conferences, job interviews, and moments that required a version of him more polished than the exhausted man in the mirror. He studied his reflection. 8 months had aged him a decade. The constant weight of fear, of double shifts and medication bills and midnight ambulance rides, had carved lines into his face and grayed his hair. But underneath the fatigue, there was steel and unyielding resolve forged by a love so fierce it defied reason. He wasn't just a father. He was a fortress. Meridian Pharmaceuticals rose from the street like a cathedral to modern ambition glass, and still gleaming under the morning sun, its vast lobby filled with clean lines, polished marble, and hushed conversations. The receptionist greeted him with that serene, practiced warmth found in corporate fortresses. Her voice equal parts polite and firm. "Mr. Martinez, Miss Walsh is expecting you. I'll escort you to her office." The elevator climbed in silence, smooth and soundless except for the whisper of soft jazz humming through hidden speakers. David watched the city fall away beneath him. The glass walls offered a view of a world untouched by desperation of people with full medicine cabinets and dinner reservations, unaware that one floor above them, a decision was hanging in the balance between life and loss. Catherine's office was a temple of power floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline, furniture that spoke of status, abstract art that murmured exclusivity. But the woman herself, she was different now. The sleek armor of her tailored suit was wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and dark circles hollowed the space beneath her eyes. She looked less like a titan of industry and more like a mother who hadn't slept in days. "David," she said, rising from behind her desk, "thank you for coming. How did the board meeting go?" She gestured for him to sit, then took a breath deep, waited. "Complicated. The board wasn't thrilled. Cardo life isn't profitable. The numbers don't lie, we lose money on every dose." David felt the air leave his lungs, like someone had knocked the wind from him. "But," Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength, "I reminded them we're not just a business. We're a pharmaceutical company, and that means something. We carry a responsibility to the people whose lives depend on us." I told them I didn't build this company to turn our backs on sick children. David looked up, barely daring to believe what he was hearing. "And they listened," she said, smiling, truly smiling for the first time. "We're keeping Cardo life, but we're restructuring. We'll distribute it through a compassionate use program. No profits, just enough to cover costs." David's throat tightened. He blinked fast, trying to hold back the tears suddenly burning his eyes. "For your son, that means $60 a month. No more $1,400 price tag. And for the other 46 families, it means their kids get to grow up." Emotion washed over David in waves: relief, disbelief, gratitude so deep it hurt. He turned away briefly, trying to collect himself. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Catherine said gently. "You saved my life, David. This is me returning the favor." He wiped his eyes. "This isn't just a favor. You're saving Jake's life." "Good," she said softly. "That's exactly what I intended." She leaned back, her eyes clouding with thought. "I spent a lot of time thinking last night about our conversation, about who I've become. I started this company because of my father. He was a pharmacist, small town, Ohio. He used to say medicine wasn't about money. It was about being there for people when they needed it most." She looked at David, her voice trembling slightly. "I lost sight of that. It took a 10-year-old boy I've never met to remind me." Silence settled again, comfortable, sacred. The parents, drawn together by chance and bound by something deeper. Catherine broke the silence. "There's something else," she said. "This program, it's going to need a coordinator, someone who understands these families, who knows what they're going through, someone who can speak with compassion." David looked up. "I want to offer you the job, David. Patient advocacy coordinator. You'd work with families, help them access treatment. The salary matches what you're making now with both jobs, but this comes with benefits. Normal hours. You'd be home for dinner with Jake every night." David stared, the words settling over him like sunlight after a storm. "I don't have any experience with that kind of work." "You have the only experience that matters," she said. "You're a father who fought for his child. You understand what these families need because you've lived it. And more than that, I've seen how to handle crisis. You don't panic. You don't give up. That's exactly who I want representing this program." He stood, unsteady with the magnitude of what this meant. "Miss Walsh, Catherine, she smiled. "You already thanked me. The night you saved my life, you saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with." She extended her hand. "Welcome to the team, David. I think you're going to change a lot of lives." David left Meridian Pharmaceuticals floating light, buoyant, like a burden he carried so long had finally been lifted. For the first time in months, he wasn't calculating medication costs or rationing hours of sleep. Something had returned to him, Quietly and completely Hope. He drove straight to Jake's school. Arriving just as the final bell rang, he waited by the fence, the scent of cut grass and children's laughter swirling in the air. Then he saw him, Jake, small and resilient, his face lighting up like sunrise at the sight of his father. "You're early," Jake exclaimed. David knelt to meet him eye to eye. "I had good news to share," he said, his voice warm with unshed joy. "Remember the important meeting I told you about?" Jake nodded eagerly. "Well, the woman I helped, she's making sure you'll always have your medicine, and she offered me a new job, a good one. I'll be home every night now." Jake's eyes filled with wonder. "Really? So I don't have to worry about the medicine anymore?" "No more worrying," David whispered. "Not about that." Jake threw his arms around his father's neck, and David held him close, feeling the rhythm of his tiny heart beating strong against his chest. "This is the best day ever," Jake said into his shoulder, and for once, David didn't think about tomorrow. He just closed his eyes and let the moment hold him. A father, a son, a second chance, and the promise of something beautiful just beginning. Hope, at last, had come home. David Martinez had cradled his son tightly that evening, heart swollen with a mix of disbelief and fragile joy. He thought of the other 46 families across the country who would soon receive the same call that had shifted his world. The call that whispered hope where there had only been fear, that handed back futures snatched early by fate. Parents who, like him, had learned to live with the hollow ache of helplessness would finally see a light cutting through the dark. And yet, even in that moment of improbable grace, David couldn't silence the gnawing voice inside him, the one carved from years of scraped-together rent, of insurance denials, of hope dangled just out of reach. Life had taught him that promises from the powerful often withered in the cold glare of corporate boardrooms. Gratitude was fleeting, guilt even more so. Would the miracle last when shareholders started grumbling? When profit margins dipped and media cameras moved on to the next tragedy? That night, after Jake had drifted into the easy rhythm of sleep, breathing a soft, steady hymn, David sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the sleek business card Catherine Walsh had handed him. It was elegant, professional, and terrifying, a symbol of a world he'd never belonged to. He'd been betrayed by hope before. In the early days of Jake's diagnosis, every doctor seemed to offer some shimmering possibility of trial just months away, a new drug inching toward approval, a clinical breakthrough just beyond the horizon. But those possibilities had always dissolved under scrutiny, leaving David with nothing but a child's fragile heartbeat and the impossible weight of being his only lifeline. His phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "David, this is Catherine. I wanted you to know I've already begun the process of implementing the compassionate use program. Legal is working on the paperwork. We should be ready in 2 weeks. I keep my promises." He stared at the message, his thumb hovering above the screen for what felt like an eternity. Then he typed slowly, deliberately, "Thank you. I hope you understand how much this means." Her response came almost instantly. "I'm beginning to. See you Monday for orientation if you decide to take the job." David placed the phone down and walked softly to Jake's room. The door creaked open just enough to let in a sliver of hallway light. There he was, his boy sleeping in the tangled security of childhood. The rise and fall of his chest was the most beautiful sight David had ever known. For the first time in what felt like forever, he let his guard down, let himself imagine graduation gowns and college dorms, first loves, careers, a future where Jake's illness was a manageable fact of life, not a looming executioner. 2 weeks later, David stepped through the glass doors of Meridian Pharmaceuticals in a suit that still felt foreign against his skin. He carried a company-issued briefcase, a strange talisman of a new life. He wasn't cleaning booths or pouring stale coffee anymore. He was now the patient advocacy coordinator, a title he barely dared to dream of. His job was no longer just surviving, it was helping others do the same. True to her word, Catherine had delivered. The compassionate use program had launched exactly on time. 47 families now received CardioLife at cost, and David's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Every voice on the other end carried the same trembling awe he remembered in himself. Parents unable to believe someone had finally said yes. He'd hear their sobs, their stunned laughter, the stunned gratitude of people who lived along waiting for the other shoe to drop. Each call was a mirror, showing him who he'd been just weeks before, when the world still felt like an unrelenting storm. But it was in his 3rd week that David stumbled upon something that changed everything. He'd been reviewing patient files, Late into the evening, when he came across a folder with a name that stopped him cold. Personal. See Walsh curiosity edged out propriety. Inside, nestled between medical summaries and dated memos, was a photograph of a young girl maybe 7, with sunlight in her smile and Catherine's unmistakable eyes. Her name was Emma Walsh. The attached records made David's blood turn to ice. Emma had suffered from a rare congenital heart condition, the same one Jake battled. The same one Cardiolife now treated, only Emma hadn't made it. She died in 1995, 3 years before the drug had finally received FDA approval. David stared at the photo, at the details etched in clinical shorthand. Her birth date, her death certificate, her lost potential. Catherine hadn't helped him. Merely out of gratitude for CPR, she'd done it because, in Jake, she had seen Emma. Because she knew the unbearable pain of loving a child you couldn't save. The entire program, the late-night diner, the miraculous job offer, the fight against her own board, it was all rooted in something far deeper than policy. It was penance. It was memory. It was love. Later that afternoon, he knocked on her office door, folder still in hand. Catherine looked up from the stack of reports, eyes softening when she saw him. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Good," he replied, stepping inside. "Really good. I wanted to thank you again." He paused, laying the folder gently on her desk. "I found this while reviewing files. I wasn't snooping. Her face drained of color the instant she saw the photo. "You weren't supposed to see that. I can put it back," David said quickly. "Pretend I never." Catherine picked up the photo with trembling fingers, tracing her daughter's face. "No," she said quietly. "It's okay. I should have told you the truth from the beginning." Silence settled around them like snowfall. Together, they looked at the image of a little girl frozen in time, gone nearly 30 years, yet still shaping every decision her mother made. She'd be 30 to this year. Catherine whispered, "I wonder sometimes what she would have done with her life, if she would have been proud of me, if she'd understand why I worked so many nights, trying to stop other kids from dying the way she did." David swallowed hard, tears stinging his eyes. "Is that why you became a pharmaceutical executive?" Catherine nodded. "I was a marketing consultant when Emma died. I knew nothing about medicine, but I learned. I studied. I networked. I climbed. I told myself I was doing it for the right reasons, but somewhere along the way, I got lost. I built a company instead of a mission." She looked away, eyes glistening. "The night you saved me, I'd just come from a board meeting. I'd agreed to pull Cardiolife from production. The losses were too high. I walked into that diner because I couldn't bear to go home. Couldn't face my daughter's room still untouched, still waiting for a girl who never came back." David's voice cracked. "You had a heart attack because of guilt." Catherine didn't flinch. "Because I realized I'd become someone who let other people's children die, to protect numbers on a spreadsheet. Someone who would have let Emma die. If she hadn't been my daughter." She wiped her eyes. "You didn't just save my life that night, David. You saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted you to believe in the work, not just pity a grieving mother." David reached across the desk and gently took her hand. "She would be proud of you. I know I am." In the months that followed, David threw himself into the work. The program expanded. New drugs, new diagnoses, new desperate families caught in the same impossible calculus. With each saved life, each tearful thank you, David felt the burden of his past transform into purpose. Jake's health soared. His color returned. His laughter came easier. He talked about the future in the casually beautiful way only children can. He wanted to be a doctor, he said. He wanted to help kids like him. And Catherine, she became more than a boss. She became his partner in healing. They shared stories, dinners, worries. They walked the road of redemption side by side, two souls bound not by tragedy, but by the light they'd chosen to kindle from it. One evening, 6 months into their new chapter, Catherine stirred her coffee across from him in a quiet bistro and said something that stopped him cold. "I've been thinking about stepping down as CEO." David blinked. "Why?" "Because I've done what I came here to do. The program works. The board's on board. But more than that, I remember now why I started this in the first place. I want to leave the suits and stock reports behind. I want to build something that fights for families, not margins." She looked him in the eye. "I want to start a foundation, a nonprofit that navigates red tape, that advocates for children, that makes sure no one dies because they were born into the wrong zip code. And I want you to run it with me." David stared at her, heart pounding. You want me to leave Meridian? I want us both to leave. We've proven it can be done. Now let's do more. She smiled, her expression a mix of challenge and invitation. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have beside me. David sat in silence for a moment, thinking of Jake's steady breathing, of Emma's bright eyes, of second chances carved from grief. He reached for her hand again. Let's do it. Let's change the world. That night, David sat alone in the quiet of his modest kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound breaking the stillness. The decision before him wasn't just about a job change. It was about stepping into the unknown, abandoning the predictable safety of his corporate career to follow something far less certain, but far more meaningful. Starting a foundation with Catherine meant trading boardrooms for battlefields of bureaucracy and profit margins for purpose. It meant choosing heart over habit. He stared at the mug in his hands, untouched coffee gone cold, his mind adrift in memory, just a few feet away, behind the thin walls of their apartment. His son Jake slept soundly healthy, whole, and blissfully unaware of the miracle he had once been. David's heart clenched gently as he remembered the sleepless nights, the desperate searches, the mounting costs that had threatened to bury them. And yet, here they were. Jake was dreaming of becoming a doctor and echo of all the help he once needed. David thought of the 46 families whose children now had futures, because one woman, Catherine Walsh, had dared to prioritize human lives over profit margins. He thought about the families they hadn't reached yet, the parents pacing hospital corridors, the children clinging to hope they didn't yet understand. And then, as if the decision had already been made in his soul, David reached for his phone. He didn't even wait for the first sip of his coffee. "I'm in," he told her, his voice steady with conviction. "When do we start?" 6 months later, the Emma Walsh Foundation opened its doors. The office was nothing like the high-rise towers they left behind. It was cramped and cluttered, its walls thin, its windows streaked with the stories of passing rain. But it was theirs. It was sacred in its purpose. Each morning, David and Catherine unlocked the door not just to an office but to a mission. Their first triumph came quietly, without applause or headlines. A family in Oregon, desperate and running out of options, had reached out. Their daughter's rare genetic condition required a treatment no longer available through traditional channels. The pharmaceutical company had shut the door, but the foundation didn't let it stay closed. They pushed, advocated, rallied voices in the media, and just like that, the door cracked open. A compassionate use program was revived, echoing the one Catherine had once championed at Meridian. Then came legislation, a long battle fought in halls of power. It was Jake's Law, named for the boy who once needed saving, now helping others without even realizing it. It required drug companies to keep compassionate use programs alive. For discontinued medications, on Jake's 11th birthday, the law was signed into existence, sealing hope into policy. But the Foundation's greatest victory wasn't passed in a courtroom or announced in the press. It came quietly on an ordinary Tuesday evening, when David's phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. The Emma Walsh Foundation. "This is David Martinez," he answered. "Mr. Martinez, this is Sarah Chan from Portland. I got your number from the website. I have a 6-year-old daughter with a heart condition. Her medication's being discontinued. I don't know what to do." David froze for a moment, a chill crawling up his spine. He knew that desperation. He had lived in its skin. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked gently. "Lily. She takes Cardall Life." David's heart caught in his throat. He remembered those words, those drug labels etched into the sleepless nights of his past. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady and warm, "you've called the right place. We're going to help you. Your daughter is going to be okay." As he guided Sarah through the steps of enrolling in the compassionate use program, he glanced around the room. There were photographs pinned to the walls, faces of children they'd helped, letters written in crayon and grateful ink, and in the corner, touched by fading light, was a photo of a girl with shining eyes and a joyful smile. Emma Walsh, a child whose life had ended too soon, but whose legacy was etched into every life they saved. When he hung up, David called Catherine. "We just helped our 100th family," he told her, a soft awe in his voice. On the other end, Catherine's voice trembled with warmth. "Emma would be so proud." "I think she would," David said, emotion thick in his throat. "And I think she'd be proud of her mother, too." That night, David walked through the door of his small apartment, greeted by the soft rustle of papers and the steady hum of a child's concentration. Jake sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Math homework sprawled across the coffee table. He looked up with a smile that still undid David every time. "How was work, Dad?" he asked. David sat beside him, heart full. "It was a good day, buddy. A really good day." "Did you help someone?" David paused, remembering Sarah's voice, the fear, the hope. "Yeah, a little girl about your age. Her family couldn't afford her medicine." Jake nodded solemnly. "That's good. Everyone should have medicine when they need it." David smiled, pride and love swelling in his chest. "That's right. Everyone should." The next morning, David walked into the foundation office, still riding the quiet elation of the night before. Catherine was already there, coffee in hand, a stack of applications waiting. She looked up and smiled. "Busy day ahead," she said. "The best kind," he replied. They worked in silence, but it was the kind of silence shared between people who had seen pain and chosen purpose. Outside, the city stirred to life, cars honking, children laughing, the world going on. But within those modest walls, something extraordinary was unfolding. They weren't just processing applications. They were writing stories of survival, giving shape to hope, making sure that when life cornered families into choosing between love and money, they would never stand a lone dot in hospital rooms and apartments. Across the country, children were waking up, taking their medication, imagining their futures. None of them knew about the diner where it had all begun, about a woman in an expensive suit collapsing on the cold floor, about a single father, his hands trembling, performing CPR with everything he had, about a shared grief turned into a promise. The diner still stood, Mel's Diner. Its fluorescent lights still flickered, the booth still worn and cracked. But for David and Catherine, it had become something else, a hallowed intersection where fate had stepped in and said, "Here, start again." Sometimes, after long days, David would drive by. He'd park outside and just sit there, remembering the smell of coffee, the clatter of plates, the frantic pulse of that night. But more than that, he thought of the quiet decision that followed. Catherine had once said that some coincidences were worth believing in. He now knew she was right. Some were worth building a life around. And so, David Martinez, once a night shift worker scrambling to afford his son's medication, now the executive director of the Emma Walsh Foundation, carried on. Not out of obligation, but out of love, for his son, for Emma, for Catherine, for the countless families still searching for a lifeline. The work wasn't glamorous. The lights didn't buzz like they had at Mel's. The coffee was better. The chairs didn't dig into his back. But the heart of it, the refusal to give up on people, was exactly the same. And every time he opened an application, every time a child was saved, he whispered a silent thanks to the universe for putting the right people in the right place at exactly the right time. They weren't just running a foundation. They were carrying forward the memory of a child lost too soon and the life of another saved just in time. They were making sure the space between despair and salvation narrowed. One family at a time. It was, David thought, the kind of work that made waking up in the morning feel like a blessing, and that was enough, more than enough.